Hello YouTubers, Joe Kersey here on Saturday, April 9th, 2016. And I'm going to give you a bit of a warning here. There's going to be some stuff toward the sort of the middle to end of this video that's a bit raw. So you might want to put the dogs and the kids away. Dogs and the kids to bed on this one for a bit. Alrighty. And now, here we go. Well, now it stopped. Got the camera and now it stopped. We were having a nice snow squall here about, no more than about 2 minutes ago. Well, it's a little more stove time here. Let's see. We got some pork going in here. Oh, I'm going to have to add some more water and turn the heat down a bit on that one. A little pulled pork. It's melted now here around 3 o'clock, but this morning we had the better part of an inch of snow here on the ground and the deck and everything. So hello YouTubers, Joe Kersey here on Saturday, April 9th, 2016, and it's now getting on toward, I took my watch off to cook that, to cut that meat, getting on toward 4 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time. I've had a request from a subscriber, a fellow over in Cornwall. We've been emailing back and forth about, and I'd indicated I'd tell him a story about my scouting experiences in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and Explorers. And so always liking to keep my promises to my subscribers, I thought, well, this is probably not a bad day to tell this story, given it's kind of a shut-in sort of cold-ass day. I mean, it hadn't gotten over 30 today. It was 22 this morning. It's snowing. Excuse me. So it's not, it might not be much of a story, but we shall see. I think certainly people in the United States and in the UK and probably in any of the English-speaking countries. Well, and for that matter, European country. I mean, they're familiar with the scouting movement. It takes different forms in different countries sometimes, but it's essentially you've got, a program for like 7.5 to 11-year-old guys. That's, in the United States we call them Cubs, and then you have from 11 to whenever you want to stop, apparently, up to the age of 18, Boy Scouts. And then they have a program, I don't know if this is in every country, but in the United States they have a program called Explorer Scouts, that I think, I think I started it when I was At least they got me into it when I was about 15. I don't know, that was a little bit under the, the actual age you're supposed to allowed to be in, but these other guys were in the post, and they said, "Oh, you'd like this, and come join our post, and we go camping and things." No, now more of the camping stuff and non here in a minute. And this post was sponsored by the Warren County Conservation Association, but more of that anon. Pardon me taking pills while I'm doing this. One likes to stay alive to tell another story another day. Well, the Cub Scouts, I thoroughly enjoyed Cub Scouts. I mean, it was, I could do without all the fucking crafts that you have to do, glue and shit. But we did go out to, it wasn't like, you go out in a sleeping bag and a tent and go lie out in the rain and mud camping. It was in these, there was a 4-H camp called Camp Graham down in the Little Miami River Valley, or, near the Little Miami River Valley in Warren County. And actually, my sister worked at the camp a couple, 3 summers when she was in high school as a counselor. But this was not a 4-H camp. It was a 4-H facility, and the scouts would use it. And they had these, these cabins. They had maybe 8, 12, bunk beds. You had 12 on like maybe 6 bunk beds, and they have. Each bunk bed had like a little wooden flap out window. You could open the flap out window, and no screens, but just you could, So if you rolled out of your bed, you could, roll out, which I never saw anybody do, but in theory that could happen. But what did happen was the guys in the top bunk would piss out this window, and if you happen to have your little flap open, and the wind was just right, it would blow in. It would blow in on you while you're in bed. High adventure. Now it starts snowing again, and I'm not going to break off to take a picture of it for you. Yeah, I was, I did the full 3 years, well, 3.5 years at Cub Scouts. Went through all the ranks, and then I became what they call, was it a Weebelo or some damn thing, the transition between Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. I will say that one of the notable things the year I was in was the 50th anniversary. Which I think actually was in, was it 1960? Yeah, it was 1960. So I was 8. And so you had the, and then they, every troop, or let's say it was, troop. Well, let's see, Cub Scout, something or other. What are they called? Cub Scout troops. Pack. Every Cub Scout pack had to do it was like a service project. Well, there was a very old cemetery in Lebanon, and we had graves back there to the original settling of the town back in the 1780s, 1790s, and the 1790s more accurately, and it was pretty much overgrown. So we went in there, and i.e. Which meant pretty much, the dads went in there with their sons, who kind of stood around looking clueless most of the time, and cleaned out this cemetery. the one notable thing about that was my dad had a pair of these. I think the fancy word for them is called secateurs. You know, these long-handled secateurs, and excuse me, and I just call them nippers, branch nippers. Excuse me, you know, because you cut through this. You know, the underbrush was like thumb thick. You know, and apparently the head, you know, the actual head of the tool slipped out of the handles. And I don't know where the hell that thing went. And we couldn't find it. And boy, my dad was really, really pissed. Because, and rightfully so, he had gotten that tool from his dad. For all I know, it's still in that cemetery somewhere. Archaeological artifact waiting to be found. But that was sort of the notable thing for Cub Scouts. You know, Mrs. Linebaugh, who she's now dead, so I can use her name. Mrs. Linebaugh was our den mother. That almost sounds obscene, doesn't it? But she was a good soul. She did something else too. She either drove a school bus or she was a cook in one of the schools. This family, you know, was sort of a, you know, had a sort of a suck. I mean, they worked hard. They were relatively poor, and they had two boys one of whom was in my class, and the other was just 2 years ahead of me. Both nice guys. The guy in my class played the trumpet. I think the guy 2 years ahead of me played the trombone in the band. Yeah. Good people. Dad worked at, I think the dad worked at NCR, National Cash Register in Dayton, which is a good job. But, you know, they also did a little farming on the side, but, you know, they still were, you know, they were scrambling. And so then came Boy Scouts. Now, I loathed Boy Scouts, and not because of the scouting program per se. I mean, it's a good program, I think. But because our two adult troop leaders were, how shall I phrase this? One of them was certainly a sociopath, which is kind of odd given that he's elected to associate, you know, in the social sort of organization. And the other one had psychotic tendencies. I think, see, both of these guys had been in the Korean War. They'd been in the Korean War. They were in their sort of early 40s. And they had not had a good experience in the Korean War, let's put it that way. And I think nowadays you'd put a lot of their behavior down to, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder. Or maybe they were just plain old assholes just to start, you know, one way or the other. But anyway, that's they viewed the Boy Scouts as kind of a quasi-military drill organization. So, I mean, you know, one good thing that came out of it was when I did my 2 quarters, you know, when I did 2 quarters of ROTC up at Ohio State, you know, I mean, I pretty much knew all the stuff that they did in ROTC because I had these guys in for Boy Scouts. Now, both this pack and this troop, you know, were sponsored by the Methodist Church in our town. You know, when we attended the Methodist Church, you know, certainly sang in the choir. I occasionally wandered over to the Baptists, you know, but anyway, so we'd have these meetings in the Methodist Church parish house, and you know, no, it was just these guys, yeah. And this was also during the Korean Missile Crisis. So this was in October of 1962. Two, yeah. I think two or one. Two, obviously. Um, Might have been one. Anyway, a number of our meetings were devoted to how to survive a nuclear bomb attack. The way first of all, you don't survive a nuclear bomb attack. So the way what you're aiming to do is conduct yourself in some sort of quasi-dignified, semi-ironic way before while the thing's going to happen, and I always thought the best advice was to go to the highest point available and look toward the nearest likely target, which in our case would either be Dayton or Cincinnati, and look at it, and then, ideally then bend down and look at it upside down through your legs. And when you see the flash, kiss your ass goodbye. We never practiced that drill. We had to get under tables and chairs. Yeah, that's going to really help you when the big one happens. Anyway, so there was one. I did go on one camping trip with this outfit, and it was in a field adjacent to the Little Miami River, immediately east of Waynesville, Ohio, just north of Ohio 73. Look it up on Google Earth, guys. I think it's still there as a field. I don't think they've built bullshit in it. Yet. And it was a farmer's field, and it was in it was obviously in a time of the year when there were no crops in the field, because we were out in this field. It was in the very early spring, before the soil temperature had gotten up high enough to plow or plant. That was when guys still plowed. That was before no-till. And we were in these little two-man tents. I don't think it was my tent. No, I later on got a tent similar to that. But I was in with, I don't know who I was in the tent with. Let's just say that, so I was 11, or I was in 6th grade. So I was 12 years old. Is that right? Gosh, this may have been, no, wait a minute. Well, 6th grade. Well, I was either 11 or 12. And when we set the place up, I, having read my sister's camping textbook, it was published in the 1930s, and it had all these great pictures of guys with their shirts off camping. In later years, I used to use that as how shall we say, a handheld aid. But then I was too young. And I said, we need to sort of dig like a little trench around this tent, because if it rains, then the rain's going to go right into the tent. You need to do that. One does what one is told, even though one is bewildered at that stage of the game, doesn't one? So, sure enough, despite my layer of newspaper and plastic ground cloth and my poncho sort of covering me up, now that's fine if you don't have water sort of running in underneath you and soaking all the way. Because as it turns out, we did get a heavy rain, and it did come into the tent, both from above and below. And at first light in the morning, you stepped out and you sank in up to about, not quite your, medial malleolus, but damn near to it on your ankle. Slow. Well, I didn't even bother trying to go to the outhouses, the porta-johns. I just took a piss right there. And then I sort of turned and I squished in a 360. And I said to myself, you're a fucking idiot if you stay here longer than you absolutely have to. So I packed up my shit and I got out. I didn't tell him I was leaving. I just packed up my shit, and I said, I'm going down to the creek. I'm going down to the river just to look at the river. It wasn't quite like Captain Oates saying, I'm going out for, I may be gone for quite some time. So Waynesville was just, maybe 3/4 of a mile west. And so I walked over to Waynesville to a gas station and called my folks on a payphone, and my dad came and picked me up. Excuse me. Well, of course, then the next Monday at school, word had gotten around that I had buggered off, and God bless my friend Mark. Now I've had a couple of friends named Mark. This was Mark 1, not Mark 2, who was in the bedroom when my dad with me when my dad walked in. Let those of you who have watched my previous videos hear. No, this guy lived down at the end of Green Tree Road, at the west end of Green Tree Road, well, just east of 741. And let's see, it was like his mother was insane. She really was insane. She was in the state hospital and killed herself. His dad worked at Armco Steel, great job, and they had, there were 6 brothers in like a 3-bedroom house. Now, talk about, I thought, maybe it was crowded with my sister and I in a 2-bedroom house with my parents. They were more crowded. And he was the only, he said to me, and this is in 6th grade, we were 12 years old or whatever. And he says, don't let him bug you about that. He says, anybody who had any sense would have gotten out of that damn mud hole. Because he was, he had decided not to go, for a variety of reasons. And that was fine. So after that, I just dropped out of Boy Scout. Dropped out, fuck, I quit, quit. And so then these guys, in my high school class who were in this Explorer post, invited me to join, and I did. And we had, first of all, there was none of this happy horse shit about, military drill and crap. Now, I understand that's not a typical Boy Scout experience. My son was in the Boy Scouts. He had a good experience. My grandson is in Cub Scouts. He loves it. I just encountered an outlier, clearly. But no, this Explorer post, it was sponsored by the Warren County Conservation Association, and sort of like the overarching theme or project or interest was, trying to do things to conserve, like trees and habitats, that sort of thing. And excuse me. This organization had acquired, I think it had been left to them in a will by somebody, about 80 or 90 acres of basically just scrub, what would you'd call scrubland, meaning it's like it was being taken over by second growth underbrush, kind of like what you see around here, and and there was a pond on it, and what they had done, what the organization had done, is they'd hauled in some gravel and made a road back to a pond area. They'd actually had a pond installed, and stocked it with fish. Bluegills, that sort of thing. And then what we were engaged in doing is we'd take a bush hog and we'd cut these little paths, around the place. And the idea was that people could come and walk around and see. And in time, the idea was that little, displays and little demonstration technique things, plots and things would be done. And I don't know if that ever came about in later years, but that was, we were in at the start of this. Well, you get a bunch of, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old, guys out in a field camping, the last thing on their mind is to create a nice habitat project. Generally, you'd select somebody who looked the most plausible to go into, well, not into Lebanon where we were known, but drive a little farther outside of Lebanon and buy beer. It helped also if they had an ID, but a lot of times a lot of these places, these smaller places, wouldn't card. This was in the age where people just didn't give a fuck about that stuff. This was in a time you could still have fun. And so, you bring back beer, and then, sometimes, you have these great ideas. Some of the ideas involve, let's just take off all our clothes and run around naked in these paths we just mowed today. That was one of my favorites. Or let's play strip poker, that sort of thing. That was always, that's a perennial favorite, in any sort of camping situation with a bunch of guys of that age. Well, hell, I don't know, maybe of any age. And then there was a night we decided to, now this is not a racist statement. This is a phrase that was just extant when I was growing up in Southwest Ohio. Then there was a time that we decided to fish in the manner of the Filipino. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this very colorful term and phrase, it involves throwing a high explosive into a pond or a body of water where there are fish that are likely to be close together, and the explosive goes in and explodes and it sends the fish up to the surface and you can collect the fish. Well, at that time, you had fireworks. There was one called an A6, which is essentially the equivalent of a sixth of a stick of dynamite. And then there was something called an M80, which was maybe about 2/3 the size of an A6. And they had wicks on them that would burn underwater. So you throw them in, go down, and they'd sink, they'd blow up. So one night we went back to this pond and we fished in the manner of the Filipino. We had no idea, one, how many fish they had stocked in there, and two, how wildly successful this would be. It would have probably helped if the pond had been completely full. It was only about 3/5 full at the time. That was horrible. I regret being associated with that. I do. That was bad. That was wrong. The other stuff wasn't wrong. The other stuff's just fun. And then we went to, they had a meeting of these conservation societies up in Dayton. And they took us up, and we stayed in a hotel. I think we stayed 2 nights, actually. This was in July of 1967. And, we manned tables and handed out things and, served, waited tables at the dinner and that sort of thing. And, but of course, fun things spending a night, 6 guys in a hotel room. That's, 6 teenage guys in a hotel room with 2 beds. That's always fun, isn't it? And we made the most of it. I think some of the activities involve public self-abuse in the room with contests. I told you need to put the dogs and the kids away on some of this stuff. Now the downside to that weekend was when I got home, I discovered that our house had been robbed and all my dad's guns and cameras had been stolen. So that sort of took the glow of a happy weekend off that. Well, anyway, I guess I've saved the best to last, as I often do. After the fishing in the manner of the Filipino incident, these guys, this conservation group brought in. What is this thing about ex-military? They brought in an ex-Marine. Well, you're never an ex-Marine. You're always a Marine. They brought in a Marine veteran of the Korean War to work with us. He despaired of us. He actually walked out on us. He says, I've been in the Marines. I've been a longshoreman. I've been around dock workers. He says, I have never heard anybody, any group of men, guys, boys, swear as vigorously and vociferously and extensively and widely as you guys do. He says, I can't take it anymore. And he left. He walked out. Word of that got back to, national headquarters. Or whatever the hell they call that shit, with the Boy Scouts organizations or whatever. And so they had some golden beaver, tight ass buffalo guy, whatever the rank is or whatever, come in and revoke our charter. Now, it just so happened that when I was 16, I was elected president of this post. It's the only thing I've ever been elected president of. This happened during my tenure. Our charter was revoked during our tenure. My tenure as president of this post. He comes to one of our meetings. And we were we had it in one of the, in the Odd Fellows Hall. Well, that's sort of a mixed name, isn't it? The International Organization of Odd Fellows. I think they were using odd in the more 17th century use of the term, as in diverse, wide variety. But nobody ever thought that. But anyway, our charter was on the wall of their meeting hall, wherever they, I guess wherever they did odd shit. And the guy comes in. We're revoking your charter. He goes over, takes this thing off the wall, and walks out the door. And so we kind of look around at each other. And I say, well, there's no reason we need to stop meeting. We all like to camp together. We may as well just keep camping. So we did. We spent many a happy weekend down along the Little Miami River, under the Jeremiah Morrow Bridge, the I-71 bridge, just raising general hell among ourselves. It's perfect. So there, just Richard, that's my story. And I could never have written this much in an email to you, could I? So I'll say bye-bye, YouTubers.